vengeance!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. You see him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweater working for the man, alright. Well, hey. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take all the way to sprinklers on, alright. Well, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you. He rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network, and welcome to the Drafting the Circuits radio program. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we break down everything racing. With me in the studio tonight is Mr. Gray Warren, Mr. Richard Youden, and Mr. Joey Barnes. How is everybody tonight?
Thank you.
All right, great to have you guys here. So, big breaking news story happened just literally a few hours before we began our taping, but this one kind of came out of the blue. I sure didn't expect to hear that Chad Knaus and Jimmie Johnson will not be together next year, Daryl. They're going to switch things up. Young William Byron will have Chad Knaus as the crew chief, as Jeff Mandering moves over to the team to take over the Jimmie Johnson car. So, Gray, is this a look towards the future to try to boost young Byron's career as Jimmy's career is in a twilight, or is it just an attempt to shake things up and make everybody there more competitive?
Well, I think it's the latter, Frank. I think that the 48 team is in the midst of its longest losing streak that they've had. This is not unusual in the sport over the years. The Jimmie Johnson, Chad Knaus relationship has been a long and fruitful one, to say the least. But I think it comes a time in any relationship in professional sports when things tend to go stale, and I think this is what we're seeing. I think it's probably from the organization's looked at this, and it's probably a mutual on everybody's feeling that something had to be done just to shake things up, to have a fresh start. We all know that Jimmy's probably in the last 2 years of his career. I mean, that's not a big secret. I think Jimmie done after the 2020 season. And I think it's just a shake-up at Hendrick Motorsports to kind of get them turned around and in the right direction again. They've shown some good speed in the last few weeks, obviously with Chase Elliott winning a couple of races in the last quarter of the season. So yeah, it's some good positive things going on over there. I think when you look at some of the stuff that's gone on with Jimmy's team. This year, they've had some uncharacteristic mistakes. They've had some failures and stuff, and people have kind of scratched their heads on that. The ball joint thing at Dover this weekend, that could be just a simple part failure that could, 1 in a million that could happen to anybody. But I think, when you run bad, things like that are compounded. And I think it's just time and things get said, and there begins to be a tension within the team, between the two principals on the team, the crew chief and the driver, and I think that's probably what's led to some of that. So they're going to bring in Kevin Mandering to be the new crew chief for Jimmie Johnson.
Jeff.
So I think they've worked together. He's worked in the 48 organization before, so that'll work. And I think Grubb, let's see, he's going to that was the crew chief for William Byron, Darian Grubb. He's going to move up to technical director. So it's just going to be some shifting of people and personnel inside that Hendrick organization. I think they'll get this done. They'll come out swinging in 2019.
All right, so now, Richard, you wanted to talk about that ball joint issue a little bit.
Yeah, it's typical. It's an interesting one. It's typical, my opinion, for what it's worth here. Typical sort of NASCAR shenanigans. That's not a part you'd replace between qualifying, practice, and the race, to my mind, unless there's an issue with it. And then for it to fail, almost straight away on the weekend in the race, it leads you down one path. And this was something that years ago at RCR we had an issue with in one race. The cars will typically make it a very aggressive maneuver onto the banking as they come off pit road. The idea of that is there'll typically be parts on the car that are designed to be in a certain location to go through inspection, and then when you attack that banking and sort of slam the car into the banking, it'll jolt the suspension or the geometry into such a way that will actually increase the skew of the car. And my guess is that this was potentially a new part on the car, and the loading that it saw as they went up that banking was more extreme than they've run in the past, or that their simulation have shown, and that's what caused it to fail. So, a little bit unlucky there, but, to a certain amount, there's a lot of due diligence has to be done when they do these little tricks and, parts like this and what have you. And it's amazing how often you see a car, have these issues, on the laps before they go to green. I think the 78 had something similar happen earlier in the year. I'm not entirely certain, but it's not completely unheard of.
Well, yeah, and what you're saying is true and correct too. It's hard to, and to a degree of speculation. I know the 3-car had a similar issue at Texas early in the year when they were swaying their car around up and down on the apron and had broke a trailing arm early on. So yeah, those things do happen as well. And so like I said, I just think like anytime there's a failure like that and you're in the midst of a pretty dismal season where things haven't gone your way, you're coming off not making the chase or making the playoffs. So obviously morale was probably a little bit low throughout the team, and there was some tension again, like I said, between the two principals. I think it's just it was inevitable that something had to change, and I think they made it. I think in a lot of other areas it may be a good move for Hendrick. Obviously, the combination with Chase and his crew chief seems to be working and coming around now, so obviously you don't want to upset that. But William Byron is looked upon as an up-and-comer in the Hendrick organization. And to put a 17-year veteran like Chad Knaus with him, to pair him with him now to help him get his career rolling, it is not a bad idea. And then to take Mandering and bring him into the Cup Series and pair him with Jimmie Johnson kind of jump starts his Cup career a little bit. So, only time will tell, but it may be a good move for the Hendrick organization all the way around.
Yeah, I certainly think it will be. I mean, time will tell, and even if it all doesn't work out, Jimmie and Chad have both earned their place in the Hall of Fame, in my mind anyway.
One of the greatest combinations.
Yeah, the seasons those guys put together over the last decade and a half are phenomenal. So, and we've got a few races left in this season to see if they can get one more together before the season's up. So, but let's talk about the race this past weekend at Dover. As you mentioned, Chase Elliott coming into his own. Very popular win again. The fans love this guy. I think he's got a lot of personality. I think he's got a lot of talent. I think he's a very popular winner. But you couldn't help but feel bad at the end of the day for old Eric Amarola, man. That guy can't seem to catch a break when it looks like it's his day, huh?
Well, looked like it was going to be a Stuart Haas parade. at one time, all four of their cars were running in the top five. Well, I think 1, 2, 3, 4 at one time during the course of the race.
Didn't Ford have 7 of the top 5 at one point?
At one time they did. That's correct. And it looked like it was going to be Harvick's race to win or lose, whatever way you want to put it. He dominated the race until he had an issue on pit road. Had the pit crew during a tire change knocked one of the valve stems off, and he had to make an extra pit stop, which put him back in the field, and he wasn't able to completely recover from that. And that allowed Almirola to ascend to the front, and he led a good portion. And like Frank said, he looked to be headed to his second win of his career. But as always the case, some late race cautions and a restart was the end of the road for his bid for victory, and opened the door for the number 9 car to come up and in some ways steal the race. But you got to put yourself in position to win these things, and he certainly did. One of the things that's probably been Chase's downfall in some of the races that he's lost is late race restarts. Well, he hit this one like he needed to and was able to drive away there at the end and get the win. So, yeah, big win, popular win, like you said, Frank, for another young driver. 2 weeks in a row we've gotten Ryan Blaney and Chase Elliott wins, and I think that's good for the sport. Both of these kids are the future of the sport, and, get the fans excited.
Yeah, so for Eric Almirola, I mean, the difference for him, is that would have guaranteed him a spot in the next round had he won that. Instead, he's still below the cut line, along with his teammate Clint Boyer is below the cut line as well, and the other guys, are Larson and Bowman are the two other guys below the cut line, and Talladega is a wild card coming up. You really wanted to make hay at Dover, where the conditions are a little more controlled, for lack of a better word, compared to Talladega. Yeah,
right. Talladega can end your bid in one lap. That's and it be done. But the good thing, even though they lost the race, the 10 Almirola and that 10 crew can walk away from that race knowing, hey, we were a factor in this race all day long, and we can win these races, and we can compete at the highest level at the top. So they're going to come away, as disappointed as they are not being able to win race, they're going to come away with that with a lot of confidence. If they can squeak through Talladega, and I tell you, Almirola is a really good plate racer, and they have good cars there, so I'm sure he's, everybody goes into Talladega with a bit of trepidation, but I'm someone like Almirola is probably going in with on a high note, with a good deal of confidence going in, knowing if he can keep his car up near the front, he's got a good shot of winning and advancing to the next round. So, and then of course, you could have some guys that right now look like they're sitting pretty can be caught up in a big wreck and go from in to out, in a heartbeat at Talladega, and that's always the case. It's a wild card. We know that going in, but I think the 10 guys have got to walk away from Dover feeling pretty good about their team.
Well, I think the entire Ford camp in general has come on strong during the playoffs. When we look at who won the playoff races so far, Elliott kind of snuck up and stole this one, but Kyle Busch grabbed one. But Keselowski, Blaney, Almirola running good. Harvick's always running well, and plus the end of the season, the Ford is on fire just at the right time of the year.
And true. And Ford's been tough all year, and probably look like they're heading toward a manufacturers championship this year. But look at the resurgence Chevrolet has enjoyed over the last few races. Arguably, the 42 had the best car at the Roval at Charlotte before getting caught up in an accident. Jimmie Johnson ran very well at the Roval. we've talked about him trying to win the race from second place, and him and Truex getting together. Then you've got Chase coming on and running well enough to win at Dover. So Chevrolet's made some strides too, and they've been a lot more competitive down the stretch. And of course, when we go to a place like Talladega, that's the great equalizer. You could have any one of the three makes win there next week, and it wouldn't be a surprise. So,
yeah, you could show up in a Buick or an Oldsmobile, and if you survive the carnage, you can win the thing. Yeah. So, but it's always fun to watch. So.
Oh yeah, no doubt. It's one of the most exciting races of the year, and then when you throw in the playoff element into it, it makes it even more so. And of course, with Dover being, Dover was the first race in this segment, so Talladega is the middle race in this round of 12, and then we go to Kansas as a transfer race next week. So people are going, like I said, Talladega is going to be a very interesting race. It's one of these modified type impound type things. I think the teams report on Friday, track activity on Saturday, practice and qualifying, and then the cars are impounded for Sunday. And of course, we've got a little bit of a hurricane coming up off the Gulf Coast, slammed into the panhandle of Florida today, and it's skirting through the eastern portion of Alabama up into Georgia and headed up into the Carolinas now. So I know the trucks were held back a little bit before they leave. Of course, obviously, they don't have to check in till Friday. So there's still plenty of time, and this storm is pretty fast moving. So I don't think we're going to see any real impact from the storm affecting the race at Talladega this weekend.
Now, most of that weather should have run through there, so we've got a few more minutes left. We can spend on NASCAR, but about enough time to make some picks. And Richard, Talladega's a crapshoot. Throw a dart at a dartboard. So,
gosh, that's really.
Yeah, it could be anybody, couldn't it? It'd be good if Jimmie Johnson won, wouldn't it?
Oh, sure, yeah.
That one out there. Let's stick that one out there.
All right, and Gray, who you liking?
Gosh, I don't know. You could have a spoiler come up in this thing, but I tell you, the young guns seem to be really coming to the forefront here lately. I'm going to say maybe Kyle Larson gets a long overdue win this season.
Good pick there, and I'm gonna go with Brad Keselowski. He's been one of the strongest plate racers. He's been really strong at Talladega the last 4 or 5 years, and certainly, with him being only 2 spots above the above the cut line, getting a win in Talladega and securing a spot to the next one will certainly give him a better level of comfort heading into Kansas and heading into the next round of the chase. So, with that being said, Joey Barnes is here. We're going to talk about IndyCar for a little bit. Got some driver movement. Largely the big teams are staying static, with the big exception of Felix Rosenqvist coming in to take that number 10 car alongside Scott Dixon. I think that's a good move. I like Felix a ton. But in my mind, Ganassi hasn't had a solid 1-2 punch since Dario stopped driving. So, what are your thoughts on Felix here? Do you believe that this is really gonna make a solid 2-car effort out of Ganassi again?
I do. I think Felix is an elite talent. I know we've said that in previous shows where I've kind of given my thought about Felix just being one of those guys that if you put him in a car next to Lewis Hamilton, he's going to go challenge Lewis Hamilton. I just think that his talent is on that kind of level. And so this is a really good move in multiple ways for Ganassi. One, it probably gives you somebody that can challenge Dixon, which after 5 championships, he's clearly not getting complacent except for winning. So from that perspective, I think that Felix can help bolster the overall roster in that mindset. But whenever I look at this, I also feel like this is an opportunity to maybe move beyond Scott Dixon at some point in time. This is a situation where somebody like Felix is somebody that you can build around for years to come, the same way that we saw Chip do with Dixon many, many years ago. So really good overall move. I hate it for Ed Jones. I hope that he finds a situation that's a little bit more stable for him, and because he does deserve a place on the IndyCar grid. But this is just another guy to come in and help create even more talent to an already ridiculously talented IndyCar roster.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of Ed Jones, so you're talking he was able to parlay his Indy Lights scholarship money into a ride with Dale Coyne. That Dale Coyne ride transferred into a full-time ride with Ganassi the following year, where Ed was actually collecting a paycheck, and now it looks like he's out the door. And it kind of reminds me of Gabby Chavez utilized his sponsorship money, ended up running a full season with Brian Herta. Herta's team merged with Andretti, and Gabby was out the door. Found a second opportunity with Harding Racing. Harding's now merged with Steinbrenner, with Andretti thrown in there for good measure. Gabby again once looking for work. And then we talk about a guy like Kyle Kaiser, who had enough money to, with the scholarship, to have 3 runs in Ricardo Juncos' car. And as Ricardo was having conversations about who's going to be in his car or cars next year, he's talking, he's very frank with the fact that he's looking for pay drops. And with, Kyle's money dried up, it doesn't look like it's going to be Kaiser in that car. Like I say, they may put him in the sports program, but what is this? What is this for the last Indy Lights guy that's still there and doing well? The guy that won the championship and parlayed his scholarship money into something good is Spencer Pigot. So, what are your thoughts, particularly when you factor in the Mazda's leaving the program too? What's the future for Indy Lights champions and moving into the series and staying?
Well, I think that, talking to Dan Anderson, I guess now is about a month ago, but seeing what's evolved and transpired since Mazda announced that they were leaving in July, he's been hit head on with multiple different things. And when you look at it, trying to come up with a prize money package for next year, trying to figure out what kind of partners that are some are automotive and some are non-automotive, coming into the program to help bolster it, so that way that scholarship can be in place. So from that end, I believe Anderson Promotions, Road Indy, and IndyCar are doing all they can do with the resources that they're given to try to ensure that they can present something for an Indy Lights champion. They still want to continue to do something that involves the 3-race deal, which includes the Indy 500. And, at the end of the day, racing's expensive. And the funny about this is IndyCar's towards the, for lack of a better word, lower end of what it would cost to get in a top-tier series. It's not going to be NASCAR money, which is ridiculous. It's not going to be F1, which is incredibly hyper-ridiculous, if that's even a word to use. But, I would like to see something, because clearly, there's got to be a way to change this up. And I don't know if it involves getting Chevrolet and Honda in a joint effort to help delve that money towards the Indy Lights champion. Maybe it's a situation where that 3-race deal comes together on behalf of Anderson Promotions, and in being the Indy Lights champion, they get their 3-race deal, but maybe the other, say, 14 races are a 50-50 split between Chevrolet and Honda. That's tough to agree on if that guy's driving for the other team, though, right? So maybe it's a situation where maybe we're bidding on these guys at some point in time, because we've got to make sure that we keep the Road to Indy champions, progressing up the ladder and coming in. I think that, for lack of anything else to say, it's just, in some ways, obviously, it's really unfortunate. At the same time, IndyCar is about having the most elite talent you can from all around the world, and sometimes that's not always going to come from the Road to Indy. Sometimes it's going to. Spencer Pigot is less championship after championship from Road to Indy, and he's had to fight every step of the way. Let's not forget that this is a guy that was a part-time driver for road and street courses for 2 years of his career, and I think the bigger part of that is the fact that Carpenter Racing, it's an owner in Ed Carpenter that's trusting that driver. And the second part of that is you've got partners like Fuzzy's Vodka and Ferd Freezer that they found a way to gravitate towards Pigot. They found a way to latch on because they trust and believe in the potential that this kid can deliver, the same way that maybe Newgarden delivered many years ago for them. So I think that part of that is also making sure that you get in with the right infrastructure. And in IndyCar, no disrespect towards any of the teams that are coming in, but you can't. And Ricardo Juncos has even said this. I don't expect to come in and immediately beat Roger Penske. I understand that this process could take 5, 10, 15 years if it ever happens, because these guys got 20, 30, 40, 50 years on us. And it's naive to think that we can come in and immediately do anything against them. And to the other end of that, guys like Roger Penske, they're not going to win Indy Lights champion. They're going to wait, let them season out somewhere else, and they're going to pick up the evolved version of that driver once they've really proven themselves in the series. We saw that with Newgarden after Ed Carpenter, with what was it, Fisher, Hartman, Carpenter Racing, or however it was, after he kind of reaffirmed his status as a top-tier potential driver, goes on and wins a championship with Penske in his first year. So I think it's a combination of things where big teams need to be a little bit more involved. But again, I mean, if the money's not there, it's tough to produce these kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the ideal situation would be if all the teams were funded. Piggott stays in the ride because he's in a funded program. He's not expected to bring money to the program. You've got fees there and you've got preferred freezer there, right? But a lot of these smaller tier teams that are strapped for cash are the ones that are picking up these Indy Lights guys because they need the scholarship money. And then once that's spent, they're looking for money elsewhere. That's the Kyle Kaiser situation. So, I don't even, know if it's a better idea to find a sponsor for the series who, for the road to Indy that would, back the car for the year. If you get, this, you win the thing, take whatever, insert your company name, Amazon or whoever wants to do it, name goes on that car for the year, and they fund the program. A good idea or not, but the thing is, like we said, you're going into a cash-strapped team, so the ability to make a big impact is not as prevalent if you were in a top team, and then without that impact, you don't make that impression on that top team who might want to sign you. Other than Ed Jones, it worked out for him, we'll move on from that. I want to talk about the open seat at Schmidt-Peterson. Robert Wickens, we saw some video with him. Him and Hinchcliffe are racing wheelchairs. Remind me of that scene out of Days of Thunder. But, through it all, the nice thing is that Robert has not lost his sense of humor, but it's very unlikely that we'll see him in a car next year. Certainly not at the start of the season. But the team's been rather quiet of who they're looking at. So what are you hearing?
I'm not hearing too much personally. They're keeping this thing pretty tight-lipped, but I can tell you, I guess the best way I could phrase this is, if I'm in Sam's position, Mr. Schmidt, I think that you're going to look at a driver that brings some experience. Maybe not go for the hot shoe youngster that's trying to prove himself, because that's how you end up sometimes with wrecked race cars. I think we just spoke about him, Ed Jones. I mean, obviously Carlos Munoz was in that car in a substitute role towards the end of the season, did pretty solidly. But I think that somebody like Ed Jones doesn't really crash a lot of cars, and when you look at it, he's got the experience, right?
Sure,
and,
yeah.
The one thing that I'll say about Ed I say reiterate this about somebody like Ed Jones, is the fact that he's driven for 2 different teams in 2 different years in 2 different Aero Kit eras, and not one thing has ever been the same since he came in after being an Indy Lights champion. And I think that he's one of those guys that would really benefit from some consistency and some stability, and even if it's just the same Aero Kit at this point. So I think that he would be a good choice for that seat. Granted, sometimes Sam likes to go against the grain, and we saw Aaron Telitz testing that car and get positive reviews back in May. I know that Sam liked what he did. I know Hinch was pretty happy with what he saw. And there also is Santi Urrutia, who also is in Indy Lights along with Telitz, both at Belardi. But Santi has a history with Schmidt. His first year in Indy Lights, when he finished runner-up to Ed Jones in the championship, he was with Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports. So there is some connection there. And you know what? At the end of the day, when you, in some ways, don't know what anything after next year brings, if you bring in a rookie that can be quick, that can still take care of the equipment, it's a good problem to have if you've got to look over, 3 fast drivers and figure out who of the 3 to keep. Because overall, it just helps the depth of not just the team, but also the sport. Granted, to kind of bring in a football analogy, that's the Joe Montana, Steve Young situation. You trade away Joe Montana and bring in Steve Young after somebody's already won for you, or do you keep Montana and get rid of Young? And I think that's in a driver situation, that's what you could be dealing with if you bring in a guy who just goes in and performs absolutely well enough to throttle maybe even Hinchcliffe next year.
Yeah, and then you've got, throw that into the mix, that Lucas Oil is still on board with the program as far as I know. So they don't necessarily need to look toward a pay driver. And you got a guy like Connor Daly out there on the lines trying to hunt. He's done a little substitute work, subbed for Hinch, I believe, with the team.
Yeah, did great.
Yeah, did a great job. So and Connor Daly is really popular with the fans as well. He's really, the fact that he drives infrequently. He's, for some reason, people love the guy. You know what I mean? He's got a lot of personality. Some don't love him, but he would definitely put some eyes on the car. He would get to meet.
A couple there too is Lucas Oil being involved. The potential there for it not necessarily to have to be a paid driver to come in. Somebody like Connor, who in this brief conversation was kind of an afterthought in my mind, just because he wasn't somebody that we saw actively on the grid beyond a couple of races last year. He's certainly a viable candidate for that seat. And I think the biggest thing to hit home with on this whole situation is how good the sponsors have been to Schmidt this year. When you think about the overall program, think about what they had to endure in May with Hinchcliffe. And they didn't try to buy a ride to put Hinch in a car and kick somebody else out. They decided to slap those decals somewhere else. If I remember right, Jay Howard had a little bit. Obviously, Wickens had some on his car, and they didn't pull anything out of that situation. And Honda has also been really supportive of the situation. And then you look at what happened with Wickens, and Lucas Oil, stands by the entire process. I think that it's so important that we have sponsors that are, for lack of a better word, this human, right? That they understand the human element of the sport and back a situation like that, because there's so many man hours and woman hours, for that matter, involved in getting these cars up and going. And it's so much emotion, so many things. And so when something doesn't go right, sometimes you see it hit you money-wise, but if it hits you money-wise, it's also going to just potentially take you out of the sport altogether. So to have sponsors like that is great, and I think that the next guy that's going to come in and be maybe, in my mind, a one-year sub in that 6 car, I think we look at a situation where obviously they're going to have some approval with Lucas Oil, because Lucas Oil's been really good with them every step of the way, and you'd like to think that whoever, they're going to Sam with the process, but at the same time, Sam's going to also try to do his best to get the best representative for that sponsor in particular, because of just how good they've been with the program.
All right. Well, we'll revisit that in the coming weeks as more announcements are made. We're looking forward to announcements on, a possible third Dale Coyne car. See who Ricardo Juncos is going to put in his cars. But anyway, we're going to need to wrap this up and turn our attention to Formula One with Richard and talk about this race in Japan. So, Joe, any final IndyCar thoughts you want to throw out there before we move on?
Just kind of thinking about this, us talking about this Schmidt-Peterson situation, what if this leads to a potential third car in 2020? What if this opportunity for this sub that comes in and does incredibly well next year, potentially, if they do well, could this open up the potential for yet another car on the IndyCar grid? And I think that's something that the sport continues to grow. These sponsors have been really good to Sam. Could we see a situation like that happen? I think that would be interesting to see a team that was just a one-car program not that long ago evolving itself and growing and to go after some of the heavy hitters like Ganassi and like Andretti on the side. So That's kind of my final thought. I don't believe that whatever happens next year ends with maybe a two-car team. I think we could see a situation where it could grow from there.
Yeah, and that would be a good thing. That'd be a thing. So, all right, Joey. Well, thanks a lot for the IndyCar segment, and we'll talk about another Formula One race, another win for Hamilton. I believe it's his 8th on the season, if I'm not mistaken, and not a great weekend for Ferrari or for Sebastian Vettel, and they've just about put the championship out of reach for them, huh?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the Suzuka is one of those tracks that, with the Mercedes package, they're going to be pretty hard to beat around there. And Ferrari just were never, to coin a phrase, never at the races all weekend. There was some weather on Saturday during qualifying. It was wet and then dry, then wet and dry, and Ferrari just sort of dropped the ball a little bit and never really got the right lap in at the right time, and Mercedes executed properly. And I think the mistakes that you're seeing coming out of Ferrari are very, a very good example of a team under pressure and a team that's on the back foot. And you've got to give. There's a certain amount of criticism that is justifiable towards towards Ferrari and these mistakes, and to a certain extent Vettel as well. He's made a couple of mistakes throughout the season, and of course there was one this past weekend in Suzuka when he clashed with Max Verstappen. But you've also got to give a huge amount of praise to Mercedes, who have certainly upped the game in the last few weeks. They've really come on strong after the mid-season break, which some teams seem to be able to do. They this 2-week break in the middle of the season when you're not supposed to do any work on the car, they seem to come back with a far faster car than they started with. So you do have to give Mercedes credit there, and Hamilton especially. He was dominant. He was quick. He executed properly. He didn't make the mistakes. He put the pressure on, and he controlled the race. It was almost a perfect weekend for him, really. There was nothing. Everything went according to plan. There was no mistakes. He was never in danger during the race of not winning. A couple of times he came on the radio, a similar situation to believe what we saw in Sochi the weekend before, complaining that the engine was a little bit late on pickup, exiting a couple of the corners. But if that's your biggest problem, you're going to be doing okay. So yeah, it was a procession really. Suzuka is one of those tracks. It's an amazing circuit. It's one of the old-fashioned tracks out there, and it's the only figure-of-8 circuit they run in Formula One. And great corner after corner. You've got the S's to start with, and you've got the two little right-hand Degner flicks, and you've got the hairpin, the spoon curve, and 130R, and then the chicane where Senna and Prost came together. It's an iconic circuit. It's a fantastic circuit, but they do struggle at times with overtaking around there because the circuit is so aero dependent, and it's through those S's it's almost impossible to follow, and then you could potentially pass into the hairpin, but again you're trying to follow a car closely through the two Degner curves, and you can't do that. The long straightaway over the bridge, it's on the exit of the spoon curve, you can't really follow. Going into that final chicane, you've just come off 130R, so again you can't. It's really, really hard to pass around there, which is a real shame. But not that anybody was going to get anywhere near Hamilton to be able to pass him anyway. The only moves you saw during the race was Vettel trying to push his way through from qualifying. I think he started at 7th or 8th. It was 8th, I think it was. He made a move on Max Verstappen, which was a little bit optimistic, and they touched, and Vettel ran wide and lost quite a few spots there. But that was a sign that Vettel was under pressure, and Max isn't one of those guys that's going to give you much room, and he didn't. Later in the race, Verstappen got a penalty of his own when he clashed with Raikkonen, which was probably justifiable. That they locked up going into the final chicane, and Verstappen ran wide, and then when he rejoined the track, he pushed Raikkonen off track there, and I think he was actually given the penalty for rejoining the track in a dangerous way, which I think is justifiable. Of course, all the drivers are going to complain that they don't deserve these penalties, but it was for those of us that stayed up till 1 o'clock in the morning to watch the start of the race, I don't know how many actually made it through to the end. It was pretty. If you were an insomniac, that'd be a great race to watch.
Yeah, it was fairly uneventful after the green flag flew, at the front of the field anyway. But at the same time, so we've got social media comments about Vettel, ranging anywhere from folks starting a petition rather to put Alonso back in the Ferrari car to folks calling for Vettel's head to one guy who said, "You think Ferrari's pissed now that they're stuck with Vettel till 2020 since they signed that contract?" So I mean, obviously, Ferrari came out of the box looking really good this year. And you and I talked week after week that said, okay, yeah, this is the race where, Mercedes is going to struggle and the Ferrari should have the upper hand here, right? But then time after time that we'd come back on the following week and say, boy, Mercedes didn't struggle there, So it's to me, it just looks like Mercedes is operating at such optimum efficiency. That wherever we expect them to struggle, they have really, focused on that, and there's like very few weaknesses at all within the team. And Ferrari seems to be, I don't want to say they're in free fall, but there seem to be some disorganization there, there's trouble behind the scenes. So, do we expect can Ferrari, kind of recoup this season? Obviously, they're not going to win a title, but do you see them maybe tightening up here, maybe after Austin, salvaging a bit, or?
Oh boy, no, I really don't. And I think the criticism against of Vettel is unjustified. The guy is good. The guy is seriously good. Has he made a couple of mistakes this year? Yeah. Has he, lost races he should have won? Potentially, yeah. I mean, I think the story of this season, in a way, is going to be that midsection of the season, from probably when was it? Sort of Azerbaijan through to sort of Hungary, maybe through to the summer break, when you went 4 or 5 races in a row where the fastest car didn't win the race. And, I think that defined the championship. There was races there that Ferrari should have won, and they didn't. And, they made mistakes. And to have a chance of beating Mercedes, they needed to capitalize on those events.
It appeared, that Ferrari was going to challenge Mercedes' dominance. And I think Mercedes answered the challenge.
I think there's been a couple of things going behind the scenes as well. You've seen there's this whole sort of story of the battery system that Ferrari run, which, from my understanding, is unique to the rest of the other, unique to the other engine suppliers, and has caused the FIA to request additional sensors on the Ferrari package to confirm its legality. Ferrari say that the installation of that sensor hasn't caused them to slow down. It does correlate pretty damn closely, to tell you the truth. So, it's hard to believe that it hasn't. And of course, the other thing that happened to Ferrari, which has undoubtedly, I think, caused some upheaval and unfortunate circumstances, was the passing of Sergio Marchionne over the summer. Very, very influential person in the hierarchy there of Ferrari and the whole Fiat Chrysler group. How much of an impact has that had on the senior management level? You'll probably never know, but undoubtedly somebody in that position will have an effect. So maybe they're on a bit of a rebound from that, and they're struggling a little bit there. But, it just again highlights the level that Mercedes are working at. I'd almost say it's more impressive than when Red Bull won those 4 championships in the early sort of 2010s. They're not making mistakes. They arguably win races they shouldn't win. They're the complete package.
Yeah, and even there's a little bit of luck involved, right? But there's no real luck in racing, right?
No,
it's all luck is where your preparation meets the road, So
to take a golfing analogy, Gary Player once said, "The more I practice, the luckier I get."
Right. But I would
which
say,
is very true.
Yeah, I would say we haven't seen a team this much on their game since. What was it? 80, 88, 89, where McLaren won 15 of 16 races. Yeah. So and even when Red Bull won all those championships, they slipped up every now and again.
You didn't get this impression of the dominance that
Mercedes has right now, right?
I think with Mercedes there is this certain, and I'm sure this comes from Toto Wolff, there's this certain air of sort of German efficiency. It's all very clinical and very clean cut. Whereas when you had Christian Horner spouting off at Red Bull, it was all a little bit of arrogance thrown in there, or you got that impression.
Just like they go to the racetrack and expect to win.
And this is the difference. I think Red Bull expected to win. The terminology I would use for Mercedes, and you could say this about any leading race team. Probably Hendrick had the same mentality when Jimmie Johnson was winning all the championships. They go to a race weekend expecting to execute a plan. They know that if they execute that plan, they will win. More often than not, they will win a race. And NASCAR is slightly different. But in Formula One, at the moment, with the way the series is set up, Mercedes don't go there thinking we're going to win. They don't look at... the race a Formula One race is the culmination of, at the track, 2 days of practice and qualifying. And in the factories before the race, hours of simulation and hours of vehicle dynamics work, and hours and hours of aero development. It is purely, those 2 hours are such a small grain of sand on the beach of what goes into winning that race, that they know Mercedes go through these processes and they execute efficiently, and they get the job done. You go back in Formula One to 20, 30, 40 years ago, and you look at the results. Even the cars that were winning the championship, if it was a 16 race championship, as some of them were back then, they'd probably retire from 4 or 5 of those races at least. Mercedes' reliability is bulletproof pretty much. And they've changed the mentality of the sport massively over the last 20 years. It's not like a sport anymore. It's run like a business. If you were a business, you couldn't accept a 25% failure rate in your product, like Formula One was having in the 80s and 90s. You need a 99.9%, success rate. And that is the mentality that these teams have now. It is all about executing a plan and executing a strategy. And they know that if they execute the plan and they execute the strategy, and I'm not talking about race strategy, I'm talking about business strategy, then they will get the results. So you've got to give a huge, huge, huge amount of credit to Mercedes and what they've done there.
Yeah, it's marvel. It's a marvel to watch how they do it. And like you said, it's almost has a clinical type presentation.
Yep.
How they do it each week. It's cut and dried. It's almost you don't see any emotion until the race is over. It's all bang, 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 and it's if you watch practice, if you watch qualifying, it's the same thing. They go through, they have their plan, they do it, even down to when the cars come out, when they come out to qualify, when they put their lap together, and it's usually they make a flying lap right at the very end of each session, and it either advances into the next or wins the pole ultimately. And you rarely see it go awry. And still, when it does go awry, when we think it may go awry, it may be that same precision. It's just that on this particular day that Ferrari was better.
Yeah.
But they still stick to their plan and go forward in the race. And it's amazing to watch. It really is.
And that's why, they have all of this simulation work and all of these tools available to them. And, the amount of data that gets processed, literally every single lap that is taken during practice and qualifying is, of every car. Mercedes will have data on every single car in that field. And it will do all the analysis. It will work out all the optimum pace, setups. And they will then put into these supercomputers that they use, predictions of race strategies and fuel usage and tire usage and all these sorts of stuff. Then they will play out a race on these simulations tens of thousands of times, literally between the end of qualifying and the start of the race. And as the race goes on, all of these strategies and simulations are updated in real time. So, a lot of these calls that you see are not, a crew
They're not
chief.
done on the they're not done on the fly, right?
No, they're not a crew chief throwing a Hail Mary here and trying to, take a 10th place car and win the race.
Mm-hmm.
These are strategies that are, and the problem is there. Every team's doing this now. So you're working to sort of, I guess, the lowest common denominator. There's no room for improvement. So your margins are so small that it's very, very hard for other people to compete with an organization as efficient as Mercedes.
Absolutely, yeah. So we got the a week off again, and then the Formula One circus comes to the United States, where Lewis Hamilton has won the last couple, or the last three or four, right? Yeah. So good on Lewis, but before we kind of wrap up, I want to talk about another news story that broke this week, which is the announcement of the Formula W series. Now, this is the series that has they've been talking about it for a couple of years. It was on again, off again, on again. Now it's apparently on, and it's a single-seater series. It falls somewhere between Formula 3 and Formula Renault, if I'm not mistaken.
They're basically Formula 3 chassis.
Yeah, somewhere right in there, and it's exclusively for female drivers. And this is they say this is to give women a leg up to prepare for careers in Formula One. There are some folks who think this is a good idea. There are other folks who think this is segregating the boys from the girls. And you want to say, how many players in the WNBA have you seen go on to join the Los Angeles Lakers, right? Zero.
Exactly.
And then you've got, Professor Pippa Mann, who's a good friend of the show, has been one of the most vocal to say, this is just a step in the wrong direction, There are so many very talented female racers in junior series right now, starting with this young lady that won a K&N race last week. And if you go all the way down to the karting levels, there are some really talented young ladies out there making a name for themselves. And I don't think it's right to segregate them and say, oh, here's your own little playground, and even like other trailblazers of the sport, like Lindsay James is saying, no, if the ladies are as good as the gentlemen, they need to compete with the gentlemen. So, I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on this? Is this good for the sport, good for the movement, or is it bad?
I think it's difficult, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I think it's good that they'll have an independent platform, but again, it's like, I mean, to put it into terms that we could maybe understand, it's a bit like comparing Indycar to Formula One. Is a Scott Dixon going to be able to compete in Formula One? Is the people that win the Formula W Championship going to be able to compete in Formula 2 or Formula 1 or whatever?
Right, yeah. Is it a legitimate springboard?
Yeah.
Because it's largely, it's a spec series, which a lot of your junior series are, but, you open the door for comparison and stuff. Oh, well, the fellas in this series are faster, or heck, it could go the other way. It could be that the girls are a lot quicker than the guys in similar equipment. So
I think it's difficult. I mean, I think that, these days, any team that would try to negatively discriminate against a woman from being successful in single-seater racing would have a very, very hard time. I think that, if women, at the end of the day, when they get in a car, they've got, fireproof overalls and a helmet on. Nobody cares, what gender, what religion, what color of their skin is. Nothing like that. Nobody cares. So if the women are good enough, they will make it.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
I think the problem isn't this. I don't think the problem is, there's this, there's no Formula W or whatever you want to call it. The problem is how many girls, and young women do go-karting. You go to a Grand Prix weekend, and I'm sure it's the same in IndyCar, and to a certain extent it's the same in NASCAR. You go around the grandstands, and it's, 60-40 the split male-female probably.
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at how many, 8-year-old girls there are down at your local, go-kart track or your little dirt track or whatever. There's hardly any. That's where the issue is, not manipulating it to create an output for these people, for the women, or any minority. Any perceived minority.
Yeah, but what I've witnessed anyway over the past decade or so, that those hardly any young ladies at the karting track or at the local dirt track has increased. There are more and more.
Yes.
So I think and some of these young ladies are very, very good racers, and I think it's just a matter of time as the numbers increase at the junior levels till somebody really breaks through and just resets the bar for what's for where we're at. So, but anyway,
I think
go ahead, Greg.
I think like what Richard was saying, you don't want to create this artificial venue for them to compete in. The big thing is if given the opportunity, these women, these young ladies with the proper opportunity are going to have to win. And they're going to have to win when their chance comes up. And if they do that, then that will further the door opening for other young women down the road. So what's got to happen is we've had these women come in before. But the women have to be given an opportunity, and they have to make the most of it, of their opportunity to win. And bottom line is they got to win against the guys to further their cause. That's what they've got to do.
All right, fellas, we are out of time. We are out of time, but Richard, I want to give you the last word of the evening goes to you, Richard Youden, and the floor is yours.
Okay, so what happens when a female racer wins the Formula W series, gets in the Formula 1 car, and is 3 seconds off the pace?
Well, there's guys in Formula 1 right now who are 3 seconds off the pace. I mean, yeah,
what happens if they don't get to Formula 1?
Yeah, exactly. I think that the car they're putting out there is still a few steps down from Formula 1, and it comes with a good amount of scholarship money. They're saying, what is it, $150,000 or $500,000 for the winner and $1.5 million purse overall. I mean, there's some good money behind this, and the interesting thing is one of the guys behind it is David Coulthard, who has not been exactly kind with his comments about women drivers over the years, but
coincidental, isn't it?
Coincidental, yeah. But guys, we are out of time. I want to thank you, Richard, Gray, and Joey. Appreciate you guys. Seth, we missed you this week. Hopefully, you're weathering the storm there, and your internet comes back on. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network, iHeartRadio, and all you folks that tune in to listen. Have a good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website.